The sound of running water and clinking dishes echoed through the mansion's marble hallways at 3 a.m. Maxwell Pierce, one of the country's wealthiest tech entrepreneurs, stood frozen in the doorway of his kitchen, watching as 12-year-old Sophia meticulously scrubbed each plate. Her small hands were red and raw, her school uniform still on despite the late hour. What Maxwell discovered next would change both their lives forever, and force him to confront a truth about success he'd spent his entire life avoiding. Maxwell had always prided himself on being observant, on seeing patterns others missed. It was how he'd built his fortune. But somehow, he'd missed what was happening right under his roof. As he watched Sophia work in silence, tears streaming down her exhausted face, he felt something crack inside him. Why was his housekeeper's daughter washing dishes in the middle of the night? And why had his staff informed him she hadn't been to school in weeks? "Sophia," he called softly. The girl jumped, nearly dropping the expensive crystal glass in her hands. Her eyes, wide with fear, met his. That look would haunt Maxwell for years to come. "I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to wake you." Maxwell Pierce had faced down corporate rivals, survived market crashes, and built a tech empire from nothing. But nothing had prepared him for what he was about to learn about Sophia's life, or for how it would force him to re-examine everything he thought he knew about wealth, privilege, and what truly matters. The journey began 3 months earlier, when Maxwell had hired Maria, Sophia's mother, as his new housekeeper. Maria was hardworking, efficient, and rarely spoke about her personal life. Maxwell, consumed with his latest acquisition, barely noticed her beyond the immaculate state of his home. He certainly hadn't paid much attention to her quiet daughter who occasionally accompanied her on weekends. That night changed everything. After discovering Sophia in his kitchen, Maxwell gently coaxed her to sit down at the breakfast bar. He made her hot chocolate, something he hadn't done for anyone in years, and waited patiently as she clutched the mug with trembling hands. "I'm not in trouble," she finally asked, her voice small. "No," Maxwell assured her. "But I'd like to understand why you're washing dishes at 3 in the morning instead of sleeping." Sophia stared into her mug for a long moment. "Mom's sick," she finally said. "Really sick. She doesn't want you to know because she's afraid you'll fire her. We need this job, Mr. Pierce. We need the health insurance." Maxwell felt his chest tighten. "And school? My assistant mentioned you haven't been attending." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "Someone has to take care of Mom when she's too weak from the treatments. And someone has to make sure your house is clean so you don't notice she's not doing everything herself." She looked up at him, her young face showing a determination that stunned him. "I'm good at cleaning. I can do it. Please don't fire my mom." Maxwell sat back, the weight of her words hitting him like a physical blow. While he'd been focused on billion-dollar deals, this child had been shouldering burdens no child should bear. She'd been silently maintaining his perfect life while her own fell apart. "Where is your mother now?" he asked gently. "Sleeping. She has chemo tomorrow. I snuck out to finish the dishes because she was too tired." Maxwell made a decision in that moment that would set in motion events he couldn't possibly foresee. "Finish your hot chocolate, Sophia. Then I'm going to drive you home." What Maxwell discovered at Maria and Sophia's small apartment that night shook him to his core. The modest 2-bedroom unit was spotless but sparse. Maria slept on a mattress on the floor, medical bills piled neatly on the kitchen counter. A calendar on the wall was marked with treatment dates, work schedules, and school events, many of the latter crossed out. Maria was mortified when Maxwell woke her, immediately trying to get up despite her obvious weakness. "Mr. Pierce, I'm so sorry. Sophia shouldn't have bothered you. I'll be at work tomorrow, I promise." "You have stage 3 breast cancer," Maxwell said, not as a question but a statement. The evidence was all around, the prescription bottles, the head scarf by the bed, the pamphlets from the oncology center. Maria's face crumpled. "Please," she whispered. "I need this job. The insurance. Sophia needs." "Sophia needs her mother," Maxwell interrupted. "And you need to focus on getting better, not cleaning my house." The fear in Maria's eyes was palpable. It was a look Maxwell had seen before, in competitors he'd crushed, in employees he'd laid off during tough times. But never had it affected him like this. This wasn't business. This was human suffering he had the power to alleviate. "I'm not firing you," he clarified quickly. "But things are going to change." The next morning, Maxwell canceled all his meetings. For the first time in years, billion-dollar deals could wait. Instead, he made calls to his personal physician, to the best oncologists in the country, to his lawyer. By afternoon, he had a plan. When he presented it to Maria, she wept. Full salary while she focused on recovery. The best medical care money could buy. A proper apartment near the treatment center. And for Sophia, a tutor to help her catch up on missed schoolwork and the promise that she could be a child again. "Why?" Maria asked through her tears. "You barely know us." Maxwell couldn't fully articulate his answer then. It would take months for him to understand it himself. But something had awakened in him that night in his kitchen, something he'd buried beneath spreadsheets and acquisitions and the relentless pursuit of more. The weeks that followed were transformative. Maxwell found himself spending evenings helping Sophia with her homework, learning about her dreams of becoming a doctor, to help people like Mom. He sat with Maria during chemo treatments, working on his laptop but present in a way he hadn't been for anyone in years. His executive team was baffled by his sudden unavailability for late meetings. His board questioned his focus. But for the first time since founding his company, Maxwell found himself questioning whether the empire he'd built was worth the cost of the connections he'd sacrificed. One evening, about 2 months after finding Sophia in his kitchen, Maxwell arrived at Maria's apartment with dinner to find Sophia crying at the kitchen table. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down the bags of food. "Mom's test results," Sophia managed between sobs. "They're not good. The doctor said the cancer is spreading." Maxwell felt his carefully constructed world tilt. He'd thrown money and resources at the problem, certain it would be solved like every other obstacle in his path. But cancer didn't care about his billions or his influence. That night, after Sophia had finally fallen asleep, Maxwell sat with Maria in her small living room. "I'm scared," she admitted, her once vibrant face now gaunt. "Not for me. For Sophia. What happens to her if—" "Don't," Maxwell interrupted. "We'll find another treatment. I have connections in Switzerland, experimental protocols." Maria reached out and took his hand, stopping his flow of words. "Maxwell," she said gently. It was the first time she'd used his first name. "You can't fix everything with money and power." The word struck him like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly what he'd built his life around? The belief that enough resources could solve any problem? "Then what?" he asked, feeling helpless in a way he hadn't since childhood. "Be there," Maria said simply. "For Sophia. That's what she'll need most." The conversation haunted Maxwell for days. He'd been throwing resources at Maria's cancer, but maintaining a careful emotional distance, just as he did in business. Efficient. Effective. Uninvolved. But Maria's words forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth: some of life's most important moments couldn't be delegated or managed from afar. The turning point came unexpectedly. Maxwell had arranged for Sophia to attend an elite private school, certain the superior education would secure her future. But 3 weeks in, the principal called. Sophia had been skipping classes again. Maxwell found her not at home, but back at his mansion, in the kitchen, washing dishes. "Sophia," he said gently. "What are you doing here?" She didn't look up. "This is where I belong." You belong in school. Learning. Preparing for your future. Sophia finally turned to him, her young face streaked with tears but set in a determined expression. Those kids at that school, they have everything. They complain about their parents buying them the wrong color iPhone. Meanwhile, my mom is dying. Her voice broke. I don't belong there. I belong here, working. It's what we do. We work and we survive. Maxwell felt something break open inside him. In Sophia's words, he heard his own childhood voice, the poor boy who'd fought his way out of poverty through relentless work, who'd learned early that survival meant never stopping, never showing weakness. Sophia, he said, kneeling to meet her eyes. You're right that hard work matters. But your mother doesn't want you to just survive. She wants you to live. How? Sophia demanded. How am I supposed to just be a normal kid when everything is falling apart? Maxwell had no easy answer. For the first time in decades, his wealth and power offered no solution. Instead, he did something he couldn't remember doing since his own mother died when he was young. He opened his arms. Sophia hesitated only a moment before collapsing against him, her small body shaking with sobs. Maxwell held her, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. We'll figure it out together, he promised. One day at a time. That night marked a genuine shift. Maxwell stopped trying to fix everything from a distance and started being truly present. He moved Maria into his guest house so Sophia could be close to her mother while still attending school. He rearranged his schedule to drive Sophia to school himself, using those morning drives to really listen to her fears and hopes. And most significantly, he started sharing his own story, his childhood poverty, his mother's early death, his relentless drive that had brought him wealth but left little room for connection. I thought if I just worked hard enough, made enough money, I could make sure no one I cared about would ever suffer, he admitted to Sophia one evening as they sat by Maria's bedside while she slept. But that's not how life works, is it? Sophia, wise beyond her years, shook her head. Mom says money is just a tool. It's what you do with it that matters. Your mom is very smart, Maxwell said, looking at Maria's sleeping form with newfound respect. As Maria's condition worsened, Maxwell faced a truth he'd been avoiding: she wasn't going to recover. The experimental treatments had failed. The best doctors in the world had run out of options. Now it was about making her comfortable and preparing Sophia for what was coming. One evening, as autumn painted the trees around his estate in brilliant colors, Maria asked to speak with him alone. I need to ask you something, she said, her voice weak but her eyes clear. Something I have no right to ask. Maxwell took her hand. Anything. Sophia, Maria said simply. When I'm gone, she has no one else. The weight of her unspoken request hung between them. Maxwell, who had spent his adult life avoiding attachments and responsibilities that couldn't be managed with money, felt fear rise within him. He wasn't father material. He knew nothing about raising a child, especially one facing such profound loss. But looking at Maria, this woman who had shown such dignity and grace in the face of unimaginable challenges, he found he couldn't refuse. I'll make sure she's taken care of, he promised. Maria shook her head weakly. Not just taken care of. Loved. She needs to be loved, Maxwell. Not just provided for. The distinction struck him deeply. All his life, he'd equated provision with care. Writing checks with involvement. But Maria was asking for something more fundamental, something money couldn't buy. I don't know if I know how, he admitted, the confession painful in its honesty. Maria's smile was gentle. You already do. I've watched you with her. You just need to trust yourself. 2 weeks later, Maria slipped away peacefully in her sleep. Sophia, curled against her mother's side, was the one who realized she was gone. Her scream brought Maxwell running from his study. The days that followed tested everything Maxwell thought he knew about himself. He had always prided himself on his composure, his ability to function under pressure. But watching Sophia's grief, raw and overwhelming, broke something open in him that had been sealed shut for decades. The funeral was small but beautiful. Maxwell had arranged everything, sparing no expense while respecting Maria's simple tastes. Afterward, as mourners departed, he found Sophia sitting alone beneath a tree, her black dress dark against the colorful fallen leaves. "What happens now?" she asked as he sat beside her. Maxwell had prepared for this question. He had documents drawn up, arrangements made for the best boarding schools, trust funds established. All the practical matters were handled with his usual efficiency. But looking at Sophia's face, so young yet marked by experiences no child should endure, he set aside his prepared speech. "Now we figure out how to live," he said simply. "Together." Sophia studied him, her grief momentarily overshadowed by surprise. "You mean I'll stay with you? In your house?" "If that's what you want," Maxwell said. "Your mother asked me to take care of you. Not just your education or your future. But your work, your life." Sophia protested, echoing the doubts in his own mind. Maxwell looked out over the cemetery, at the fresh grave of a woman who had taught him more about courage and love in a few months than he'd learned in decades of business success. "My work will always be there," he said. "But some things matter more." The adjustment wasn't easy. Maxwell had to learn to balance board meetings with parent-teacher conferences. Sophia had nightmares that left her screaming for her mother in the dark. They both made mistakes, had arguments, faced moments of doubt. But slowly, something remarkable happened. The mansion that had once echoed with emptiness began to feel like a home. Rooms that had been designed to impress now held Sophia's artwork, her books, evidence of a life being lived rather than a showplace being maintained. 6 months after Maria's death, Maxwell faced a crucial decision. His company was on the verge of its biggest acquisition yet, a deal he'd been working toward for years. Finalizing it would require 2 weeks in Tokyo, non-negotiable. It also coincided with Sophia's school play, her first since her mother's death, a role Maria had encouraged her to pursue before she became too ill. In his old life, there would have been no question. Business always came first. He would have sent an assistant to record the play, perhaps arranged for flowers to be delivered backstage. Problem solved. But as he sat in his office, looking at the calendar with its conflicting commitments, Maxwell realized the choice before him represented everything he'd been learning since that night he found Sophia washing dishes at 3 a.m. The board was stunned when he announced he was sending his CFO to Tokyo in his place. His major investors questioned his commitment. His executive team warned of potential disaster. Maxwell listened to their concerns with the same careful attention he'd always given business matters. Then he said simply, "Some opportunities only come once. I won't miss this one." Sitting in the school auditorium 3 days later, watching Sophia take the stage, Maxwell felt a fullness in his chest that no business success had ever provided. When she spotted him in the audience, the man she'd expected to disappoint her as adults had so often done in her young life, her face lit with surprise and joy. After the performance, as they walked to the car together, Sophia asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "What about your big deal in Tokyo? Won't your company be mad?" Maxwell looked down at this child who had somehow become the center of his world. "The company will survive. Some things are worth more than business success." "Like what?" Sophia asked, genuinely curious. Maxwell thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a middle-of-the-night discovery in his kitchen to this moment of simple connection. He thought about Maria, about the lessons she'd taught him through her dignity and love. And he thought about the man he'd been before and the man he was becoming. "Like learning what really matters," he said. "Like keeping promises. Like being there for the people who count on you." 1 year to the day after finding Sophia washing dishes in his kitchen, Maxwell stood in that same kitchen watching her make breakfast. No longer the frightened, exhausted child working in secret, she moved with confidence, occasionally directing him to pass ingredients or stir something. "You know," he said as they sat down to eat, "a year ago I thought I had everything figured out. Success, wealth, power, I had the formula perfected." Sophia looked up from her pancakes. "And now?" Maxwell smiled. "Now I know I had it all backward. I thought success would bring happiness. But it was learning to care about someone else more than myself that finally made me feel successful." That evening, they visited Maria's grave together, placing fresh flowers against the headstone. Sophia traced her mother's name with her fingers while Maxwell stood quietly beside her. "Do you think she'd be proud of us?" Sophia asked softly. Maxwell considered the question carefully. "I think she'd be amazed by your strength and how you've kept going despite everything. And I think she'd be surprised by how much I've changed." "You have changed," Sophia agreed. "You don't look at your phone during dinner anymore." Maxwell laughed. "Is that your measure of personal growth?" "It's one of them," Sophia said with a small smile. "Mom always said you could tell what people valued by what they gave their attention to." The wisdom in the observation, Maria's wisdom, now living on through her daughter, struck Maxwell deeply. As they walked back to the car, Sophia suddenly stopped. "I've been thinking about something." "About what happens next?" Maxwell felt a flutter of anxiety. They'd settled into a comfortable routine over the past year, but he still sometimes worried that Sophia would decide she wanted a different arrangement, a different guardian, someone who actually knew what they were doing as a parent. "What about it?" he asked carefully. "I want to start a foundation," Sophia said, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. "For kids whose parents are sick. To help them stay in school and not have to worry about money or taking care of everything." Maxwell stared at her, momentarily speechless. This child, who had endured so much loss, was thinking about how to help others facing similar challenges. That's a wonderful idea," he finally managed. "Could we use some of your money?" Sophia asked practically. "Just to start it. Then maybe other rich people could help too." Maxwell felt something he rarely experienced, the sting of tears. "We can use as much of my money as you want," he said. "But it won't be my foundation. It will be yours. Maria's Scholars." "How does that sound?" Sophia's eyes widened. "Really? You'd let me run it?" "With some help until you're older," Maxwell clarified. "But yes. This is your vision. Your way of honoring your mother." 2 years after that middle-of-the-night encounter in his kitchen, Maxwell stood at the back of a conference room, watching with undisguised pride as 14-year-old Sophia addressed a group of potential donors. Maria's Scholars had already helped dozens of children stay in school while their parents underwent medical treatment. Now they were expanding to provide housing assistance and counseling services. A colleague sidled up beside him. "Never thought I'd see the day when Maxwell Pierce took a backseat to anyone," he commented. "Especially a teenager." Maxwell smiled, watching as Sophia confidently answered questions about program metrics and success rates. "Best decision I ever made," he said simply. Later that night, as they celebrated the successful fundraiser with ice cream at home, Sophia grew thoughtful. "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked. "Before me and Mom complicated everything?" Maxwell considered the question seriously. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," he admitted. "Business problems have clear solutions. Spreadsheets balance or they don't. People are messier." Sophia nodded, waiting for him to continue. "But no, I don't miss my old life," he said firmly. "It was empty in ways I couldn't even see until you and your mother showed me what I was missing." "Which was what?" Sophia asked. "Purpose beyond profit. Connection. The kind of joy that comes from caring about someone else's happiness more than your own. Sophia smiled, satisfied with his answer. Mom would say you finally learned what really matters. Your mother, Maxwell said softly, was the wisest person I've ever known. 5 years to the day after finding a young girl washing dishes in his kitchen at 3 a.m., Maxwell Pierce stood in the doorway of Sophia's bedroom, watching as she packed for college. The scared 12-year-old had grown into a confident, compassionate young woman who had been accepted to several prestigious universities. She had chosen to study medicine, still determined to help others as she couldn't help her mother. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked. Sophia looked up from her suitcase. "Almost. Just trying to decide which photos to take." Maxwell noticed the framed picture of Maria on Sophia's nightstand, the one that always stayed there, no matter what. "You know," he said, "when I first saw you that night in the kitchen, I thought I was going to solve a problem. Write a check, make arrangements, and go back to my life." Sophia smiled. "Instead, you got stuck with me." "Instead, I found my family," Maxwell corrected gently. "And learned that true wealth has nothing to do with money." As they stood together in the room that had become Sophia's home, Maxwell reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From employer and employee's daughter to guardian and ward to something deeper, a bond that transcended conventional definitions. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Of both of us," Sophia corrected, crossing the room to hug him. "We figured it out together, just like you promised." That night, long after Sophia had gone to bed, Maxwell found himself wandering into his kitchen. The room where everything had changed. He stood in the same spot where he had discovered Sophia 5 years earlier, remembering his shock at finding her there. He had been so focused on building his empire that he'd become blind to the struggles of those right in front of him. It had taken a child's courage and a mother's grace to show him what truly mattered. Maxwell Pierce, billionaire, CEO, and now the proud guardian of a college-bound young woman, smiled to himself in the quiet kitchen. His companies had continued to thrive, though he now measured success differently. Maria Scholars was changing lives across the country. And he had found a purpose that no amount of wealth could have provided. All because he'd walked into his kitchen at 3 a.m. and found a young girl washing dishes when she should have been sleeping. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important moments in life come disguised as interruptions. The trick is recognizing them before they pass you by. If you found this story moving, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Sometimes the greatest wealth comes from the connections we make and the lives we touch along the way.